The paper was already on the table when I walked in. Not blank. Not a draft. Final. My manager, Owen, didn't ask me how I was doing. He didn't ask me to sit. He slid the document forward with 2 fingers, precise, rehearsed, and said, "This is just standard procedure." I saw my name at the top before I understood what I was looking at. Role reevaluation notice. Effective immediately. My throat tightened as I scanned the page, expecting, needing, to find something real. A missed deadline. A complaint. A date. Anything I could recognize as my own mistake. There was nothing. Just words that sounded serious enough to end a career without explaining why. Organizational restructuring. Strategic realignment. Position under review. I looked up and asked, calmly, what exactly this meant for my promotion. Owen smiled. Not unkindly. Not apologetically. He said the same thing again. This is standard procedure. In that moment, anger hit me. Not loud, not explosive, but sharp and sudden, like realizing you've been pushed off something and there's no ground underneath you. They weren't correcting me. They were repositioning me. And they expected me to accept it quietly. The room went quiet in the way it does when the outcome is supposed to be obvious. Owen slid a second sheet forward. Timeline for transition, it read at the top. Everything about the setup said this had been done before. Many times. I read the document again, slower this time. Still no examples. Still no dates. Still no reference to a single conversation I remembered having about performance concerns or structural changes. When I asked who initiated this review, Owen didn't answer directly. When I asked when it was decided, he said it had been under consideration for some time. When I asked why this was the first time I was hearing about it, he leaned back slightly and said, "We're communicating it now." That was when it clicked. This wasn't about restructuring. This was about creating a record that made blocking my advancement look justified. The promotion I'd been promised 3 months ago, the one everyone knew was mine, had just been quietly withdrawn. And this document was the cover story. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I asked one question instead. Can I take this with me? The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. My name is Alexis Porter. I say that now because, in that room, I suddenly understood how easily a name becomes just a file. I had been with the company for 5 years. Never missed a deadline. Never received a complaint. Never been flagged for underperformance. My reviews were consistently strong. The kind people stop noticing because they don't cause problems. I told Owen that. Briefly, evenly. Not as a defense. As a fact. He nodded, as if that didn't contradict anything at all. That was the most unsettling part. No one was arguing with me. No one was accusing me directly. They were letting the document do the talking. Owen explained there would be follow-up alignment meetings. HR would be looped in. The process would continue. Process. I walked out of that room with the paper in my hands and a realization settling heavily in my chest. Whatever had happened to bring me there didn't start in that meeting. It started weeks earlier. Quietly, carefully. While I was still doing my job, believing rules existed to protect people like me. And I was about to find out how wrong that belief was. I tried to remember when things changed. When the workplace stopped feeling predictable and started feeling staged. 3 months ago, everything was normal. I was delivering projects on time. My clients were satisfied. My manager gave consistent positive feedback. Then the promotion conversation happened. The senior director role opened up. Owen told me privately I was the top candidate. Just need to finalize a few things, he'd said. Keep doing what you're doing. So I did. I kept my head down. Kept delivering. Kept assuming the path forward was clear. But looking back now, I see the shift. Feedback stopped arriving in writing. Praise that used to come in emails started coming verbally, casually, in passing. Conversations about my future became vague. We'll revisit that soon. Let's see how things develop. And then, 2 weeks ago, I was left off a project kickoff meeting. A major one. One I should have been leading. When I asked Owen about it, he said it was an oversight. We'll catch you up later. But I was never caught up. And that meeting became the first of many I wasn't invited to. The exclusion was subtle at first. Easy to rationalize. Maybe they forgot. Maybe the invite list was copied from an old template. Maybe I wasn't essential to that particular discussion. But then it kept happening. Strategy meetings I used to attend regularly. Client calls I'd always been part of. Planning sessions for projects under my purview. Decisions started being made without me. And I'd only learn about them afterward, through summaries sent via email. Framed as if I'd participated. Or as if my input hadn't been necessary. My name started appearing next to decisions I never made. Outcomes I never agreed to. When I raised it once, carefully, Owen said communication had been streamlined. Trying to keep meetings efficient, he explained. You'll still be informed of anything relevant. But being informed isn't the same as being included. And I started to realize that my visibility was shrinking. Not because my work had changed. But because the rooms I was allowed into had. That was when my manager started avoiding eye contact. Conversations became shorter. Less direct. And I knew, without being told, that something had already been decided. The language in email started changing around the same time. Words like concern and alignment began appearing. Not attached to specific incidents. Just floating there, vague and ominous. We want to ensure alignment moving forward. There are some concerns we'd like to address. Still no feedback. Still no examples. Just implications that something was wrong, even though my work hadn't changed. I kept delivering. My numbers were solid. Client satisfaction stayed high. But numbers, I was learning, don't protect you when the narrative shifts. And the narrative was shifting fast. Emails that used to be warm became transactional. Meetings that used to feel collaborative became one-sided. I'd present an idea, and Owen would nod without commenting. I'd ask a question, and he'd say he'd get back to me. He never did. The distance was intentional. I could feel it. 2 weeks after the role reevaluation notice, I received another email. Subject line, follow-up discussion. Mandatory attendance. No agenda. No context. Just a calendar invite from HR. I stared at it for a long time before accepting. Because I knew what was coming. And I knew I needed to be ready. The second meeting was worse than the first. HR sat across from me, a woman named Patricia I'd never worked with directly. She referenced ongoing concerns about my fit within the evolving organizational structure. When I asked what concerns, specifically, she said they were broad. Cultural. Not tied to one incident, but a pattern. What pattern? I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she talked about leadership's vision for the department. How roles were being evaluated for strategic alignment. How some people naturally fit the direction, and others might be better suited elsewhere. Elsewhere. That word hung in the air like a threat. I realized this wasn't performance management. This was positioning. They were building a case. Not to fire me. but to justify why I wouldn't be promoted. Why someone else, someone more aligned, would be a better fit. The emotional turn happened right there. Fear gave way to clarity. I wasn't being critiqued. I was being managed out of contention. And the process was designed to make it look reasonable. Patricia mentioned policy. Said everything being done followed standard HR guidelines. I asked which policy. She said she'd send it over. I requested every policy she referenced. Every guideline. Every procedure they claimed to be following. Patricia hesitated, but eventually sent them. A PDF arrived that evening. 23 pages of corporate language about performance reviews, role evaluations, and organizational restructuring. I read it late that night. Slowly. Carefully. Highlighting sections. Cross-referencing dates. And that's when I saw it. The gap. According to the policy, role reevaluations require documented performance discussions. Multiple check-ins. Written feedback summarizing concerns and improvement areas. Employees were supposed to be given opportunity to address issues before formal action was taken. None of that had happened. No documented discussions. No written feedback. No opportunity to improve. They'd skipped straight to the reevaluation notice. Standard procedure, Owen had called it. But half the procedure was missing. The required steps never happened. And that omission wasn't an accident. It was intentional. Because if they'd followed the full process, I would have had time to respond. Time to document. Time to challenge the narrative before it hardened into fact. I sat back, staring at the highlighted sections, and something shifted. I stopped defending myself. And started building a case. I changed my approach after that. No emotion. No arguments. No trying to convince Owen or Patricia that I was valuable, that my record spoke for itself, that this wasn't fair. Instead, I became procedural. Every meeting got a neutral recap email. Thank you for today's discussion. To confirm, you mentioned concerns about alignment but did not provide specific examples or policies violated. Please clarify by end of week. Every vague concern got a written request for dates, incidents, and documentation. You referenced a pattern. Can you provide the dates and details of the incidents that form this pattern? My tone stayed professional. Calm. But the requests were relentless. And I noticed something. HR's responses started taking longer. The language softened slightly. We'll review and get back to you became we're still assessing. Silence, I realized, had been their advantage. As long as I stayed quiet, accepted the narrative, didn't ask uncomfortable questions, the process moved smoothly. But the moment I started documenting, requesting, clarifying, the machinery slowed. Because bureaucracy hates gaps. And I was making every gap visible. The pressure increased over the next 2 weeks. More meetings. Colder language. Patricia started talking about fit and trajectory in ways that felt like subtle threats. This role may not be the right long-term path for you. Have you considered lateral opportunities? Translation, accept a demotion or leave. But still no evidence. Still no documented incidents. Just repetition. The same concerns, phrased slightly differently each time, as if saying them enough would make them true. Then something changed. I received an email from Patricia scheduling another alignment meeting. But this time, someone new was copied. A name I didn't recognize. I looked him up internally. Legal department. Senior counsel. My pulse quickened. Not from fear. From recognition. Legal doesn't get involved in routine HR matters. They get involved when someone raises questions that need answers. And I'd been raising questions for 2 weeks straight. I didn't know yet whether this was good or bad. But I knew the situation had shifted. Someone outside HR was now watching. And that changed everything. Legal didn't accuse anyone. They asked questions. Simple, direct questions that HR struggled to answer cleanly. Who initiated the role reevaluation? When was the decision made? Where is the documented feedback that preceded this action? Why does her performance record show no prior concerns? Patricia tried to explain. Said the process was ongoing. Said concerns had been raised informally over time. Said this was part of normal organizational evolution. But her answers weren't landing. Because legal wasn't asking about process. They were asking about documentation. And documentation didn't exist. I sat quietly during that meeting, watching the dynamic shift. For weeks, I'd been the subject. The person being evaluated, questioned, managed. Now, suddenly, I was the reference point. The baseline against which the process was being measured. And the process wasn't holding up. Legal asked to see the policy HR had followed. Patricia sent it. Legal asked to see the documented discussions that should have preceded the reevaluation notice. Patricia said they'd been informal. Legal asked for dates of those informal discussions. Patricia couldn't provide them. And just like that, the scrutiny turned completely away from me. Meetings started getting cancelled. The follow-up alignment session Patricia had scheduled never happened. The timeline for transition that Owen had mentioned disappeared from conversation. I didn't hear from HR for a week. Then too. The silence was different now. Not oppressive. Not loaded with unspoken judgment. Just quiet. I kept working. Kept delivering. Kept documenting every interaction, just in case. But the pressure had lifted. I could feel it. Then, 3 weeks after legal got involved, I received a calendar invite. Subject line, private discussion. No agenda. Just a meeting with Patricia and someone from senior leadership I'd never met. A woman named Victoria, VP of Operations. I accepted the invite and prepared for whatever was coming next. Because I'd learned by now that nothing in this process happened by accident. Every meeting had a purpose. Every document had a function. And this one, I suspected, would be the turning point. I just didn't know yet which direction it would turn. The meeting was short. Victoria spoke first. She was calm, direct, professional. She told me the role reevaluation had been reviewed by legal and senior leadership. After careful consideration, they determined the process had not been followed correctly. The notice was being withdrawn. My role would remain unchanged. My record would remain clean. The matter was closed. Patricia sat beside her, saying nothing. Owen wasn't in the room at all. I asked if there would be any formal documentation of this decision. Victoria said yes. A revised memo would be sent within 24 hours. I asked about the promotion I'd been promised. Victoria paused. Said they were resuming normal advancement discussions and I'd be included. No apology. No explanation of what had actually happened or why. Just a quiet reversal. As if the last 2 months hadn't occurred. I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Vindication. Not loud. Not celebratory. Just quiet, solid certainty that I'd been right. And that the system, for once, had recognized it. The revised memo arrived the next day. Brief. Formal. The role reevaluation initiated on date has been rescinded. No further action required. I printed it. Filed it. And then I started watching. Because I knew consequences were coming. Not for me. For the people who tried to box me out. 2 weeks later, Owen was transferred to a different department. No announcement. No explanation. Just a quiet reassignment that everyone noticed but no one talked about. A month after that, Patricia left the company entirely. Again, no formal statement. Just an updated org chart and a generic farewell email. I was left untouched. My work continued. My clients stayed with me. And the promotion I'd been promised finally moved forward. In March, 4 months after the reevaluation notice, I was officially promoted to senior director. The role I should have had all along. And though no one ever said it directly, the message was clear. I'd been proven right. Not through confrontation. Through documentation. Through patience. Through letting the system follow its own rules until it couldn't ignore the gaps anymore. I stayed for 6 more months. Long enough to prove I could do the job. Long enough to rebuild relationships that had been quietly damaged during the reevaluation process. Long enough to make sure my record reflected the truth. Not their version. Mine. But I also started looking. Because I'd learned something important during those 2 months of bureaucratic limbo. Loyalty doesn't protect you. Process doesn't protect you. The only thing that protects you is your ability to make your value visible beyond the walls of one company. So I updated my resume. I reached out to my network. I started taking calls from recruiters I'd been ignoring for years. And in October, I accepted an offer from a competitor. A director-level role. Better title. Better pay. Better leadership. I gave 2 weeks' notice. Owen, back in his reassigned department, didn't attend my exit interview. Patricia was gone. Victoria sent a polite goodbye email. And I walked out of that building knowing I'd won. Not because I stayed. Because I left on my own terms. Intact. Proven. Ready. Looking back now, I understand what happened. They tried to quietly block my promotion. Tried to reposition me as not ready, not aligned, not the right fit. They used vague language and missing documentation to build a narrative that would justify passing me over. And it almost worked. Because the system is designed to favor people who control the process. People who write the emails, schedule the meetings, set the terms. But the system has rules. And when you know those rules better than the people using them against you, when you document every gap, every inconsistency, every moment where procedure wasn't followed, the power shifts. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I let them follow their own process, then showed exactly where it failed. The market didn't care about Owen's concerns or Patricia's vague assessments or internal politics I'd never fully understand. The market cared about my results. My track record. My ability to deliver. And when I walked into my new role, no one asked about reevaluations or alignment. They asked what I could do. And I showed them. That's the lesson. They can block you inside. But they can't block the market. And the moment you realize that, you're already free.